The room was bright, with sparkling lights that reflected off crystal chandeliers. The walls were covered with gold frames holding portraits of people who looked serious and important. A carpet, thick and soft, stretched from one end of the hall to the other. At the center, a grand piano waited, shiny and polished. It seemed to belong to the room itself, a symbol of wealth and taste. Everyone present was dressed perfectly. Men wore suits that seemed made for kings, and women wore dresses that shimmered like stars. Their conversations were soft but full of confidence. As if every word was a proof of who they were, she entered quietly, holding her coat close to her body. Her shoes were simple, her dress plain, and she did not carry any expensive bag or jewelry. She looked small among the tall, confident figures around her. Some people turned to glance at her, then quickly looked away. Some whispered to each other. The laughter was soft but sharp, like the tip of a knife. She felt it, but she tried not to let it show. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the awareness that every eye was on her, judging her. She walked slowly toward the piano, keeping her head down, avoiding anyone's gaze. Each step felt heavier than the last. The air was filled with a mix of perfume, polished wood, and soft notes of conversation. Some people had already been there for hours. They sipped wine and nibbled on small bites of food, talking about business, travels, and achievements. Their eyes moved like hawks, noticing everything but showing only interest in what suited them. She could feel their curiosity, but it was not kind curiosity. It was the kind that challenges someone, that expects them to fail. A few children were there too, dressed like miniature adults. They giggled quietly, pointing at her dress and whispering. One of the women noticed and shushed them, but not before the words reached her ears. She took a deep breath and kept walking. She could hear her own heart beating fast, matching the rhythm of her steps. Her hands itched to touch the piano, to start, but she paused. The piano seemed too perfect, too far away from someone like her. It was more than an instrument. It was a symbol, and she was not supposed to be there. A man standing nearby made a small joke, loud enough for others to hear. The laughter that followed was sharp and hollow. She tried not to notice. She had faced mockery before, many times in her life. People had laughed at her dreams at the way she carried herself. At the sound of her playing in small rooms where only a few listened, she knew the feeling well. She had learned to smile at it, to let it slide, and to keep moving forward. But this room was different. This was not a small audience. These were people who could crush her with a word, a look, or even a polite smile that hid judgment. She felt the weight of that. She felt the eyes, heavy and unkind, following her every movement. The closer she got to the piano, the louder her memories became. She remembered a tiny room where she first learned to play. The piano there had uneven keys, some that stuck, and others that made a dull sound. She had practiced for hours, day after day, ignoring the cold, ignoring hunger, ignoring the laughter of people who said she would never succeed. She remembered the small victories, the moments when a note sounded just right, and her fingers moved in harmony with her heart. She remembered the faces of those who believed in her, even when they were few. Those memories gave her courage, even now. In this hall full of strangers who would rather see her fail, her eyes scanned the piano, its black and white keys shining under the lights. It looked almost untouchable, like it belonged to the room more than it belonged to music. She could hear the whispers again, soft and mocking. They expected her to stumble, to falter, to fail. That expectation had always been part of her journey, but it never defined her. She placed her hands on the edge of the piano, feeling the smooth surface. The coolness of the wood calmed her. She breathed deeply, filling her lungs with courage. She had come too far to be afraid now. A waiter passed by, carrying a tray of drinks. Some of the wealthy guests noticed her. Others didn't. A few whispered that she didn't look like she belonged. She ignored them. She had learned to move like water, to slip past judgments and expectations, to find her space even in places where others thought she could not exist. Her fingers brushed against the keys lightly, just touching them, not playing yet. The touch reminded her of every struggle, every tear, every silent night when the piano was her only friend. That touch, simple and quiet was her statement. She was here, and she was ready. The room hummed with voices again. Conversations continued, but there was a subtle shift. Some heads turned slightly, curiosity replacing the previous amusement. The children stopped giggling for a moment, sensing that something important was about to happen. She adjusted her posture, straightening her back, lifting her chin slightly. Confidence was not arrogance. Confidence was knowing that you belonged to your art, even if the world doubted you. She had learned that lesson long ago. As she prepared to sit, a few people moved closer, interested but still wary. They watched her, perhaps wondering how someone so plain could hold such a presence. She did not speak. She did not need to. Her presence, quiet and focused, already spoke louder than their words. She lowered herself onto the piano bench slowly, aligning herself with the instrument. Her fingers hovered above the keys, poised, ready, but not yet striking. The room held its breath, though no one realized it yet. The anticipation was invisible, but tangible, like the air before a storm. She thought briefly about the people around her. She did not see enemies or critics. She saw an audience, yes, but also witnesses to a truth that music could reveal. She thought about the lessons she had learned, about patience, about perseverance, about letting the work speak for itself. In that moment, she was not afraid of mockery, of whispers, of judgment. She was only afraid of not being true to herself, of failing to let the music tell its story. And then, just before her fingers touched the keys, she remembered a small detail from her pasta teacher who had once told her, "Music listens before it speaks." She smiled faintly to herself. That was what she was about to do. Listen first. Let the room settle into silence, and then speak through every note. She could feel the weight of expectation around her, but she could also feel the power she had carried quietly all her life. She had been mocked before, yes, but she had also risen before. This moment was no different, except that the stage was larger, the audience richer, the stakes higher. She placed her fingers on the keys, not striking yet. The room seemed to notice, even if it didn't understand why. Some guests straightened in their seats, sensing the tension. The children leaned forward slightly, curiosity replacing their earlier laughter. The laughter of a few moments ago now seemed distant, almost childish. The room, filled with wealth and confidence, had paused without realizing it. She was small, she was quiet, she was simple, but in that moment, she was also the center of attention. And for the first time, no one could ignore her. And then, she took a deep breath, steadying herself. She let go of everything else, the whispers, the judgments, the glances that tried to define her. There was only her, the piano, and the music that had lived inside her for so long. Her fingers hovered above the keys, ready to tell a story that had been waiting years to be heard. The room waited too, unknowingly, for the magic that was about to unfold. She had entered as an outsider, laughed at quietly, doubted silently. But now she was about to show that music does not belong to wealth or status. It belongs to the heart that dares to play it. Her past was not filled with luxury or comfort. She grew up in a small home where every corner told a story of struggle. The walls were faded, and the floorboards creaked with every step. There were no chandeliers, no fine carpets, and no servants to bring food on silver trays. But there was a piano, old and battered, standing in the corner. Its keys were uneven, some chipped, and the sound was not perfect. Yet it was her treasure. She spent hours beside it, learning each note, each melody, each pause. Every evening, after finishing chores, she would sit in front of it and let her fingers wander. The music became a companion, a friend, a voice that never judged her. People around her often doubted her. Neighbors whispered that she would never succeed, that a girl from such a home could not dream beyond survival. Her family, though loving, could not afford lessons, new instruments, or guidance from professionals. They did what they could, cheering her on quietly, but life pressed heavily on them. Yet the lack of resources never stopped her determination. She practiced with whatever she had, improvising on broken keys, learning melodies by ear, playing pieces over and over until they felt like a part of her. School was another battlefield. Classmates would laugh at her passion, teasing her for spending time on music instead of playing outside, studying less popular subjects, or joining common games. They said she was wasting her time, that she would never fit in with the world she dreamed of. But music did not care about fitting in. Music only needed dedication, focus, and heart, and she had those in abundance. Her early teachers were few, but important. One elderly music teacher lived down the street. She could not pay him fully, but he allowed her to attend small lessons. He had seen potential in her hands, in her mind, in the way she felt music rather than just played notes. He would tell her, "Your heart will play louder than any hall, louder than any judgment. Never forget that." Those words became her mantra, repeated silently every time someone mocked her, every time she faced a locked door. Every time the piano keys under her fingers felt rough or uneven. There were moments of despair, nights when she felt exhausted, when the world seemed heavy, when every note felt wrong and every melody faltered. She wondered if all her effort would ever be recognized, if her music could ever reach ears beyond her tiny room. She cried in silence, letting tears fall on the sheet music she had scribbled herself. And in those quiet moments, she found resilience. She wiped her tears, adjusted her posture, and started again, one note at a time. The piano was not just an instrument. It was a mirror reflecting her courage, her persistence, and her refusal to give up. Her teenage years were tougher. She had to juggle responsibilities, help her family, and face constant discouragement. But she never let her dream fade. She would wake up before dawn, play simple scales to wake her fingers, practice intricate pieces late at night, and dream of a day when her music would be heard by people who did not yet know her name. Every small achievement mattered. Learning a new melody, playing without mistakes, or even performing in front of a few neighbors gave her hope. These moments were tiny victories that built a larger story, a story of persistence and passion. The journey was not only about learning music, it was about learning patience, humility, and courage. She faced rejection many times. Community events, small competitions, even neighborhood performances were spaces where people doubted her. Some laughed, some ignored, and some praised reluctantly. Each experience taught her something. She learned to absorb criticism without losing confidence, to find her own rhythm even when the world told her it was wrong, and to trust that her talent was her own. Regardless of approval or applause, her family remained her support, though they struggled financially. Her mother would sometimes bring a cup of tea, sit beside her, and watch quietly as she practiced for hours. Her father would fix broken pedals on the piano or help carry heavy sheet music books. They could not give her wealth or connections, but they gave her belief, love, and encouragement. Those simple gestures reminded her that she was not alone. That strength from home fueled her courage when others doubted her abilities. One day, she performed in front of a small group in the community hall. It was the first time she faced an audience beyond family. She was nervous, her hand shaking slightly. But when she pressed the first note, something magical happened. The sound filled the room, pure and resonant despite the old piano's flaws. People stopped talking, listened, and some even wiped their eyes. She realized then that music could transcend environment, wealth, and expectation. It was a language that everyone understood, even if they came from worlds so different from hers. That performance stayed in her memory as a turning point. It's a small but powerful confirmation that her music had value. Despite these moments of validation, mockery persisted. Some people in her town would make jokes about her playing, saying that she would never make it in the big world, in a real concert hall, or among people who mattered. She ignored the jokes outwardly, but used them as fuel inwardly. Each insult became a reason to practice more, to perfect every note, to show that talent could not be measured by background, dress, or social status. She realized that her journey was not about convincing others. It was about proving to herself that she could rise above expectations. Her piano became more than an instrument, it became a diary, a place to pour every emotion. Happiness, sadness, fear, hope, frustration, all found a voice through the keys. She composed small pieces, wrote her own melodies, and experimented with harmonies she had never heard before. Each creation reflected her life, her struggles, and her dreams. The piano was a mirror of her heart, and she learned to listen to it as much as she learned to play it. The preparation for her first real performance outside the small town was intense. She had to find venues, convince organizers, and face a new kind of audience. People looked at her differently there. Some doubted her because of her simple clothes, others because of her lack of reputation. But she was ready. She carried with her the hours, days, and years of practice. She carried the lessons from her teachers, the love from her family, and the courage that had been built in silence. She carried all of it on her shoulders and in her fingertips. And finally, she arrived at a hall that was bigger, brighter, and more intimidating than any she had ever seen. The crowd was polite but distant. Some people arrived with preconceived judgments, assuming she would not impress them. Others were curious, wondering what a girl from a small town could do. She felt the weight of their eyes, the invisible pressure of expectation. But she remembered the old piano at home, the evenings spent in quiet practice, and the lessons from her teacher. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathed deeply, and let herself feel every note before even touching the keys. She knew that music was not about appearances or status. It was about truth, honesty, and heart. When she finally began to play, the sound filled the hall. It was not perfect. The piano had its quirks, and her fingers were not flawless. But every note carried emotion, every pause carried meaning, and every melody told a story. The audience began to lean forward, their skepticism fading. Some whispered to each other, surprised by the depth they were hearing. Some had tears in their eyes, moved by the honesty that could not be faked or bought. In that moment, she realized that all the struggle, all the mockery, all the hours of silent practice had led to this. A space where her music could speak louder than doubt, louder than judgment, louder than any expectation. That performance became a symbol of what she had learned. Through her past, that talent grows in struggle. That passion cannot be silenced, and that the heart behind the music matters more than the hands that play it. Every challenge, every moment of mockery, had prepared her for this. She understood that her journey was not only about being heard, but about showing that perseverance, courage, and honesty could turn even a humble beginning into a story worth listening to. And as she left that hall, applause echoing behind her, she felt a quiet pride. She had faced doubt, faced mockery, and faced herself. Her past, with all its struggles, had not held her back, it had built her. And she knew deep down that whatever stage awaited her next, she would meet it with the same courage, the same heart, and the same unshakable connection to her music. The moment had arrived when the laughter that had once seemed distant now became sharper. A man in the room, tall and polished, leaned slightly toward a companion and made a joke. The words were light, almost casual, but they carried a weight. The kind of weight that aimed to remind her that she did not belong. A ripple of quiet chuckles followed. Some turned their eyes toward her, others whispered among themselves, sharing amused glances. She felt the sting of it, as always, but she had learned to stand steady, to breathe, and to let the judgments slide past without claiming her. She was aware, but she was not shaken. Her hands hovered above the piano, and for a moment the world narrowed down to her and the keys. Each finger poised with intention, but not yet striking. The room felt alive, as if sensing what was about to happen. People had settled into their seats, some confident they would watch her stumble, some curious, and some simply polite, waiting for the performance to end quickly so they could return to their conversations. Yet, there was a subtle tension in the air, a pause that no one could fully explain. Even the children who had been giggling moments before now watched her silently, their eyes wide with expectation. She remembered all the times she had faced this same moment in smaller rooms. In front of neighbors, in community halls where the stakes were low but the judgment felt the same. Mockery had always been a companion in her life, sometimes subtle, sometimes sharp. Yet she had learned to transform that mockery into fuel. It had sharpened her focus, demanded patience, and reinforced her determination. She had learned to convert laughter into rhythm, doubt into harmony. an expectation into her own narrative. As she looked at the polished keys, memories of her past flooded her mind. The small room at home where her fingers first discovered the patterns of notes, the evenings when she practiced until her fingers ached, the tears she shed over mistakes, and the silent pride she felt with each small victory. All of these shaped her. Each note she had played before was a story, a struggle, a triumph. Those experiences had taught her that the world could doubt her, laugh at her, or dismiss her, but music did not care. Music responded only to honesty, heart, and dedication. The man who had laughed noticed her gaze and leaned back, smirking slightly, confident that she would falter. His companion followed his expression, sharing the amusement. Others in the room glanced toward her with similar expressions. The air seemed to thicken with their skepticism. She could almost feel it pressing against her, but she did not let it reach her. She had faced this before, and she knew the power of presence, of calm, and of letting the moment speak for itself. A waiter walked past, carrying a tray of delicate glasses. Some of the guests whispered to each other about her simplicity, about her attire, and about the audacity of her presence in a room that seemed far above her social standing. Yet none of these opinions mattered to her. She had carried the weight of Mockery for years, and this was merely another step, another stage, another audience. She breathed in slowly, centering herself, feeling the smooth keys beneath her fingers. The room might see a girl with simple clothes, but she felt like the culmination of countless hours, countless struggles, and countless dreams. A small cough broke the tension, followed by another, signaling polite attention, but also a subtle challenge. People wanted to see the outcome, to confirm their preconceptions, perhaps to have a brief sense of superiority if she failed. She acknowledged the energy, but did not internalize it. Instead, she focused on the feel of the piano, the sound it could make, and the story she intended to tell through it. Each finger stretched, each joint flexed, and each hand hovered with intention. Ready to release what had been contained for so long, some guests shifted in their seats, clearly amused, still expecting a mistake, a pause, or a stumble. The children, who had been slightly restless, now sensed something important. Their curiosity replaced laughter, and they leaned forward, waiting. She noticed them and gave a slight nod, a silent connection that reminded her that music had a universal language, regardless of age, wealth, or status. She closed her eyes briefly, taking a deep breath. The memories of past lessons returned, her teacher's words echoing in her mind. Music listens before it speaks. She let that thought settle, realizing that she did not need to impress anyone. Her music would speak for itself. She was not performing to prove them wrong. She was performing to be true to herself, to honor every sacrifice and every moment that had brought her here. Her fingers tingled with anticipation, ready to translate her heart into sound. The man who had mocked her shifted uncomfortably, sensing the change in energy. He leaned slightly forward, curiosity creeping into his expression. Others noticed too, their smirks fading just slightly. They could not explain why, but something about her presence was commanding attention without a word, without a flourish. She did not boast, she did not plead. She simply existed in that space with quiet authority. And the room responded. Her hands finally rested fully on the keys. Just above the surface, feeling the cold smoothness, the subtle imperfections, the history embedded in the wood, the piano, which had seemed untouchable moments ago, now felt like an extension of herself. She had spent years learning to trust her instincts, to let her fingers follow her heart, and now all that experience converged in this single instant. The laughter, the whispers, the doubts, they all existed, but they no longer mattered. Only the music, only the moment, only her. A quiet shuffle from the back of the room reminded her that the audience was still present, still watching, still expecting. She welcomed it. Expectation could be a force if one learned to harness it. She felt a surge of energy. Not fear, not anger, but a focused determination. This was the culmination of everything she had learned, everything she had endured, and everything she had imagined. This was the threshold between Mockery and the masterpiece. She was about to create. The children at the edge of the room watched her intently. The adults, who had once whispered and smirked, were now silent, their eyes fixed on her hands, waiting for the first sound. The room held its breath without realizing it, as if sensing that what was about to happen could not be anticipated or controlled. The tension was electric, but it was hers to shape, to mold, to transform into the story she intended to tell. She took one final deep breath, allowing her mind to clear, her heart to steady, and her body to relax. She thought of her past, of the small room where music had been her sanctuary, of the hours of practice, of the quiet victories and the moments of despair. She let all of it flow into her fingers, into the keys, and into the space around her. The moment was ready, the room was ready, and she was ready. The first note was poised to break the silence, to turn expectation into awe, and mockery into stillness. And then, with a gentle press of her fingers, the first note resonated through the hall. It was soft at first, tentative, yet full of intention. The sound seemed to reach every corner, touching listeners in a way words could not. Some straightened in their seats, surprised by the clarity and emotion. The man who had mocked her felt his smirk falter, replaced by a flicker of respect. Others leaned forward, curious now, sensing that something unexpected, something profound, was unfolding before them. The second note followed. Then the third, each carrying a story, a feeling, a part of her journey. The laughter and whispers that had surrounded her moments ago faded into the background. The room, filled with wealth and confidence, fell into an attentive silence. No one dared speak, no one dared move, as if realizing that the music demanded their full attention. She felt the energy of the hall, the shifting focus of the audience, and allowed it to guide her fingers, not control them, but complement the expression she had. Cultivated through years of practice and struggle, her hands moved with precision and fluidity. Each key a word, each chord a sentence, each melody a paragraph in the story she had waited to tell. The children's eyes widened, some leaning forward involuntarily, caught in the spell of the music. The adults, too, were captivated, their expressions changing from polite curiosity to genuine wonder. The room had shifted from a place of mockery to a space of attention and anticipation, though no one realized it fully yet. She played not for approval, not for recognition, but for the truth of the music itself. Every note carried her history, her struggles, her dreams, and her courage. Every pause and every emphasis was deliberate, a reflection of the patience and dedication that had shaped her journey. The mockery that had once defined the room had no place in the resonance of her performance. It was replaced by something purer, more honest, and impossible to ignore as the music flowed. She felt a connection to the audience that transcended their social differences, their judgments, and their wealth. In that hall there was no status, no privilege, no pretense, only the language of music speaking directly to the heart. She was not an outsider anymore. She was a storyteller, a voice, and a force that demanded acknowledgement without a single word. The room had become a witness, silent and respectful. To the mastery that had been forged in struggle and patience, the first notes filled the room. Soft at first, like a gentle breeze moving through a quiet garden. The sound was clear, precise, and full of feeling. People turned their heads instinctively, their conversation halting mid-sentence. Some frowned in surprise, as if they had not expected such depth from someone they had considered insignificant. Others leaned forward, drawn by the honesty in the music. Even the children, once giggling at her presence, sat silently, captivated by the flow of melody that seemed to tell a story only their hearts could understand. She played with intention, letting each note breathe, each chord resonate, and each melody tell a part of her journey. Her hands moved with both confidence and gentleness, her fingers tracing patterns she had practiced for years, yet each movement carried something new, something alive. The room that had been filled with laughter and whispers was now suspended in the tension of the music. The wealthy guests, who had once dismissed her as an outsider, now felt themselves drawn into a story they had never expected to hear. The music was more than sound. It was a language, a narrative of hope, struggle, and triumph. Each key she struck held a memory, a lesson, and a piece of her heart. The people in the room could feel it, even if they did not know her story. Some closed their eyes, letting the waves of sound reach them. Others leaned forward, their expressions changing from polite curiosity to genuine amazement. The initial smirks and side glances faded, replaced by attention, fascination. In the realization that they were witnessing something extraordinary, her fingers danced across the keys, moving from soft, delicate passages to stronger, more commanding sections. The contrast in her playing reflected the journey she had endured. Moments of quiet tenderness were followed by bursts of strength and courage. The audience could feel the narrative unfolding without a single word being spoken. It was a story of a young woman who had faced doubt, who had been underestimated, and who had transformed every challenge into mastery. The music spoke louder than mockery ever could. The man who had laughed at her earlier leaned back in his seat, unable to hide the surprise on his face. His smirk had disappeared, replaced by curiosity and a hint of respect. Others, who had whispered or joked, found themselves holding their breath, caught in the spell of her performance. They had come expecting a small display, something polite, something easily forgotten. Instead, they were confronted with the truth of talent, dedication, and emotion. The room had shifted from a space of judgment to a space of witness, and there was no turning back. She moved seamlessly from one piece to another, each melody flowing naturally into the next. Her hands, guided by memory, skill, and emotion, created a tapestry of sound that filled the room completely. The piano, which had seemed so imposing at the start, became an extension of herself. The instrument spoke through her, carrying her story, her struggles, and her triumphs to every listener. The audience was not just watching. They were experiencing, feeling, and connecting to the music in a way that transcended wealth, status, and expectation. As the performance continued, she noticed subtle changes in the room. The whispered comments had stopped. The children's eyes were wide, fixed on her hands and the keys, completely absorbed. The adults who had initially judged her were now silent, their expressions a mix of awe and humility. The laughter that had tried to follow her into the hall had vanished. The sound of her music had replaced it, not with noise, but with presence, authority, and undeniable beauty. Her breathing was steady, her focus absolute. Each note carried intention, each chord carried emotion. She was not playing for applause or approval. She was playing because the music demanded it, because her heart demanded it. She allowed herself to be fully present, fully engaged, fully alive in the moment. Every listener in the room could feel it, even if they could not articulate it. The music had taken control, turning expectation into experience, mockery into stillness, and in doubt into admiration. The tempo shifted naturally, reflecting both tension and release. The audience felt themselves pulled along, caught in the ebb and flow of her performance. She played a section that was soft, introspective, almost fragile, and the room leaned in closer, sensing the vulnerability and honesty. Then she moved into a powerful, sweeping section that commanded attention, and the energy of the hall shifted again. It was as if she had created a living story through sound, when everyone present was part of it. The man who had initially mocked her sat rigidly, captivated by the skill and emotion before him. He could no longer dismiss her, could no longer assume she would fail. Every note she played was a reminder of what he had underestimated. The other guests, too, were caught in a similar realization. They had judged based on appearances, on status, on the assumptions they carried. Now their eyes were open, their ears attentive, their hearts unexpectedly moved by a truth that could not be ignored. The children watched with wide eyes, not understanding the full story of her life, but feeling the emotion that came through each key. Their laughter and restlessness had been replaced by focus and wonder. They sensed the power of the music, the connection it created, and the courage of the young woman playing before them. They would remember this moment, perhaps not fully understanding why. But knowing that something remarkable had happened in that hall, she played a series of rapid passages, her fingers moving with precision and speed, yet never losing clarity or emotion. The audience was captivated, unable to look away. The music had a life of its own, and it was impossible not to be drawn into it. She allowed herself to feel every note, to let every emotion guide her playing, and to communicate without speaking. The sound filled every corner of the hall, reaching listeners in ways that words never could. The melodies she created carried contrasts soft, gentle passages followed by bold, commanding phrases. Each shift was intentional, reflecting the highs and lows of her journey, the obstacles she had overcome and the triumphs she had earned. The audience could sense the authenticity in her playing, the honesty that came from years of struggle and dedication. It was impossible to ignore, impossible to dismiss, and impossible not to respect, as the performance drew to its peak. The room was completely silent, save for the notes flowing from the piano. Every listener was present, fully engaged, fully attentive, fully affected by the music. The children's eyes sparkled, the adults' expressions were solemn, and the initial skeptics had been transformed into witnesses of something extraordinary. The energy in the room had shifted completely. Mockery had no place here, only reverence, attention, and the undeniable presence of talent. Finally, she reached the last chord, letting it linger in the air, a note of completion, of triumph, of quiet victory. The sound resonated through the hall, fading slowly, leaving a sense of awe and silence. No one moved immediately, as if afraid to break the spell that had been cast. The performance had transcended expectation, turning a moment of doubt into a moment of pure appreciation. Every listener felt it, some with tears in their eyes, some with a sense of humility, and all with a recognition of the talent they had once overlooked. She lifted her hands from the keys slowly, allowing the last vibrations to settle. The room remained silent for a few moments longer, each person processing what they had just witnessed. The applause, when it finally came, was spontaneous, genuine, and unrestrained. It was not just for the music, but for the story, for the courage, for the presence that had transformed a space of mockery into a sanctuary of mastery. She did not smile or bow excessively. She allowed the music to speak for her, letting the audience feel the truth of her journey. She had played, not for recognition, not for status, not for approval, but for the art itself, and in doing so, she had changed the perception of every person in the room. The wealthy, the skeptical, the judgmental all had been silenced, not by arrogance, but by the honesty and beauty of her performance. The piano, once untouchable and imposing, had become a partner in her story. Together, they had told a tale of resilience, talent, and the power of dedication. The audience had witnessed the transformation from doubt to awe, from mockery to respect, from expectation to wonder. And in that moment, she understood fully that music was not just about sound, but about connection, courage, the truth that could not be silenced. The room remained silent for a few moments after the last note faded. The music that had flowed so effortlessly from her fingers now lingered in the air, like a memory refusing to leave. The wealthy guests who had entered the hall with confidence and amusement were frozen in place. Their whispers, laughter, and judgments had vanished. All that remained was respect, awe, and an unspoken acknowledgement of her talent. The silence was not awkward. It was filled with realization. They had been witnesses to something rare, something true, something that could not be measured by social standing or expectation. Some of the guests looked around, as if searching for someone else to validate what they had just experienced. Their eyes met each other's, and they saw surprise, humility, and even a touch of shame in expressions that had been so sure moments before. The man who had mocked her now sat straight, his smirk replaced with admiration he could not hide. He was quiet, letting the music in her performance speak where his words had failed. Others nodded slowly, acknowledging silently that they had been mistaken in their assumptions. She remained seated at the piano for a few seconds longer, letting the energy of the room settle. She did not rush to rise, did not bow unnecessarily, and did not seek attention. Her purpose had never been to impress with showiness or to demand recognition. Her purpose had been to share her music honestly, and in that honesty, the audience had found itself transformed. The children in the room, still wide-eyed, whispered to each other softly, their previous restlessness replaced by wonder. They had learned something without realizing it: the power of dedication, the beauty of courage, and the truth that talent cannot be hidden for long. She stood slowly, lifting her hands from the piano and letting them fall gently to her sides. The applause began quietly at first, then grew in strength, each clap a testament to the honesty and depth of her performance. It was not just polite recognition. It was heartfelt, spontaneous, and full of genuine respect. The guests rose one by one, some still processing the experience, others moved to their feet by instinct. Her eyes scanned the room, not seeking praise, but acknowledging the connection she had created with everyone present. The man who had mocked her earlier approached, hesitating for a moment, then extended a hand. "I underestimated you," he said quietly, almost embarrassed. She nodded with a small smile, accepting the gesture, but not needing words to complete the understanding between them. This moment, brief and understated, carried the weight of reconciliation, of acknowledgement, of the transformation that had occurred not through argument or confrontation, but through the undeniable truth of her music. Others followed, offering nods, quiet words of admiration, and gestures of respect. Some of the women, who had whispered jokes earlier, now met her eyes with humility and recognition. Even the children, sensing the shift in energy among the adults, felt the significance of what had occurred. They crowded closer, curious, inspired, and deeply affected by the realization that someone who had seemed ordinary, simple, or unassuming could possess such extraordinary talent and courage. She moved away from the piano, each step measured and calm. There was no rush, no anxiety, only the quiet satisfaction of having shared her art in its truest form. As she walked through the hall, the audience followed with their eyes, silently acknowledging the journey they had witnessed. The laughter and mockery that had once filled the room were replaced entirely by reflection and respect. In that transformation, she found a quiet triumph that required no announcement, no applause, no validation beyond the truth of the experience itself. The atmosphere was charged with a new kind of energy, one that carried respect without words. Conversations resumed slowly, cautiously, as if the audience were still processing the depth of what had occurred. They spoke in whispers, carefully chosen phrases that reflected their awe. Some admitted to themselves, and perhaps to each other, that they had misjudged her entirely. The lesson was subtle, but profound. Talent, courage, and truth cannot be ignored or diminished. No matter the assumptions of the world, she reached the door. Pausing for a moment to look back at the piano and the room that had been transformed. The instruments, the chandeliers, the gold frames, and the polished floors now seemed less intimidating, less distant. They had witnessed her story, and in that witnessing, the space had become a place of connection rather than judgment. She stepped out, not hurriedly, not triumphantly, but with calm assurance, leaving behind a hall changed not by her presence alone, but by the music she had shared. Outside, the night was quiet, a gentle breeze carrying the cool air around her. She took a deep breath, feeling relief and pride, not in the applause she had received, but in the quiet truth of what she had accomplished. The journey had been long, filled with struggle, mockery, and doubt, but it had led her to this moment of clarity and fulfillment. She understood now that the value of her music was not in how others perceived her, but in the honesty, heart, and courage she brought to it. Every note she had played, every chord she had struck, had spoken that truth. As she walked away from the hall, she reflected on the lessons she had learned through her journey. Life had tested her in countless ways through poverty, doubt, and ridicule, but each challenge had strengthened her, shaped her, and prepared her for moments like this. She realized that the journey itself was as important as the destination. Her perseverance, her dedication, and her commitment to truth had allowed her to turn mockery into mastery, doubt into respect, and silence into recognition. The music she had played lingered in the minds of those inside the hall. Even after the applause had died down, the melodies remained echoing in the hearts of the audience. Some would speak of it in hushed tones, recounting the moments that moved them, the passages that surprised them, and the talent they had once overlooked. Others would remember it more subtly, a quiet acknowledgement of the power of dedication and authenticity. All, however, had been touched by the experience, forever changed by the honesty of her art. She knew that this was not the end of her journey. There would be other halls, other audiences, other moments of doubt and challenge, but she had learned that every obstacle, every moment of mockery, and every instance of skepticism could be transformed into opportunity, focus, and expression. Her music was not only a reflection of her talent, but also a testament to her resilience, courage, and integrity. She carried that knowledge with her as she moved forward, confident in her ability to face whatever came next.